Alright, so it is my pleasure to be able to present this project to you that I've been working on for a while, which is finally available as a working paper as of the release of this video. It's called The Perfect Storm: First Nature Geography and Economic Development. This paper studies First Nature geography and its role in economic development. Now, it's hard to imagine how you could study the effect of First Nature geography on economic development when First Nature geography, by its very definition, does not seem like something which is changing over time. But I'll get back to that issue. Before I get going, I want to say that these slides and all the other material that was used to create this project is now available on this GitHub page, which replicates everything from the raw data to the final results that you see in this paper. Now here's a map which basically illustrates the entire story that I'm going to tell you in data in a moment. So in 1825, imagine now, if you can see my mouse here, imagine that if you are a merchant before 1834 and you want to sell your goods on the open market out here somewhere, England is in this direction, then before 1834 you would have to travel all the way over here, cross the shallow waters at Løgstør, which is the name of this particular region. Then you would pass the last town of Aalborg, where they taxed all your goods, and then you would also have to wait right here for favorable winds, and those kind of winds were incredibly rare. So it would be very costly and very hard to travel in this direction. And remember, this is a time where it's immensely more cheap to travel over water compared to traveling over land. After 1834, suddenly you could go this way instead. And it's a massive change. It's so much easier. So all these black dots here suddenly become practical open water ports. So you can easily get to the world's oceans via this channel after 1834. Now, of course, this relates to a huge debate in the literature. So I think you should think of my paper in this way. We have some First Nature geography here illustrated by Europe, could also be some other continent, but you both have the shape of land masses, the geomorphology, and you have what is in the soil. So is the soil very fertile? Is there coal in the soil? All of these things are First Nature geography. And then something that is suggested by the literature quite a lot is that this determines this type of process where path dependency and institutions end up having some interplay, and that leads to prosperity in certain areas. Now, what I show with this paper is that there's also a path going directly from First Nature geography to prosperity within a single generation. Alright, so just a brief timeline of events here. So between 1085 and 1208, a natural western channel closed because of gradual land rises. We know this both from historical sources and geological sources. The consequence of this was that the Limfjord towns, those black dots that I showed you before, they lagged far behind the rest of the country. Now, this would change. In 1825, there was a storm which would fundamentally change the local geography. So the so-called Agge Isthmus, a narrow piece of land separating the Limfjord from the North Sea, was breached. And because of this breach, suddenly there was a natural channel which was navigable. Not immediately. It took 9 years for sort of gradual erosion to widen it, but by 1834 we can see ships consistently starting to pass this new channel. Then they are also granted international trading rights. The market towns, they were not allowed to trade international before. Suddenly they do it anyway. So the king sort of has to adapt to allow them to trade, and this starts off the so-called golden age of trade of the region. What we see after that is a huge population growth and a changed occupational structure. So you have more fishermen, you have, of course, because now you have access to the North Sea, but you also have more people working in manufacturing. And here's a clipping from a newspaper article, and I can forgive you if you cannot read this, because it's in the so-called fracture font, which is horrible to read, but it is also in Danish. And what it says is that the 23rd of June, a ship called A.W. Claudie came to this market town Lemvig that I showed you before in the map from Newcastle with coal. So what kind of goods could they now import? Well, they could import coal, for instance. So because of the new market access, there was suddenly the basis for a massive boost of the local economy. Now, that's a nice story, but we want to estimate this. The events are nicely exogenous, so it's simply a matter of interacting some measure of being affected by this channel by the year, and then estimating a separate beta for each single year. Now, I define being affected in two separate ways. One very simple way, which I like because it's very simple, and one which is motivated by theory, and I like that as well because it's motivated by theory. And it's best illustrated in this map again. So if you see the red area, that's the dummy definition. So all the red parts are affected because they are so-called Western Limfjord region parishes. Now, the other way that I measure this is that I use a change in market access. Essentially, what I estimate is the change in market access induced from these black dots here, which are market towns suddenly becoming ports of international trade. The details are outlined in short here, but I basically use cost distance and use Dijkstra's algorithm, and then I estimate this before and after for all the ports in Denmark. Here's the first effect. This is based on data from the so-called Sound Toll Register. So we have all ships passing the town of Elsinore, north of Copenhagen, and then we have their port of origin and their port of destination. And then I count the number of ships going to a port or from a port in different parts of Denmark. And what you see here is that before 1834, there's no trade to and from ports in the west or middle Limfjord region. None at all. Whereas trade is fairly stable everywhere else, with a brief interruption by the Napoleonic Wars. Now, after 1834, suddenly there's trade to this region. Now, here's the effect for the population size. Slightly delayed compared to the effect for trade. So trade was the first effect. First, trade was introduced to this area, then population growth followed. So from 1860, we can see that population starts growing quickly. Here in the market access approach, and here on the right in the dummy approach. In the dummy approach, we can estimate that there's a 23.6% there's 0.236 log points more population in this area. Of course, in log points are approximate percentages, but we can also convert it directly to percentages exactly. And what you get is that there's a 26.7% larger population in parishes in the affected area than in the non-affected area. The causal effect of improving First Nature geography in this case is 26.7% population growth within a generation. In terms of market access, what we get is an elasticity, and the elasticity is 1.59. So a 1% improvement in market access leads to a 1.59% increase in the population size. Of course, this also affected the occupational structure. So here I've collected all the effect sizes estimated for the different HISCR codes. So that's the different standardized occupations in the affected areas compared to unaffected areas. Of course, there's something here to worry about zeros. I handle this based on the recommendations from the literature and estimated in 4 different ways. What we see consistently is that there seems to be something happening within agriculture and something happening within production and related. In this case, I've tested a lot of parameters at once, so all of this is conservatively corrected for multiple testing using the one-for-only correction. So that's also why you see slightly wide confidence intervals, maybe slightly too wide. But nevertheless, what we're really interested in seeing is whether there's a change in the occupational structure, and pretty confidently we can say that there is a change, especially in these 2 categories. Now, here we can see some more details. So we can see that the occupations that especially grew was spinners and weavers and workers not elsewhere classified. That's classical factory workers. And here we can see that the occupation of fishing increased quite a lot, and general farmers. Now, I have already shown you that there is a huge population growth, and the default occupation this time is farming. So it's pretty obvious that there would also be more farmers, but more fishermen definitely shows something about the opportunities that changed First Nature geography gave. Now, One question is whether this is caused by people moving to the area or by fertility. And what I can estimate here is that it is certainly not because of people moving to this area. If anything, here's in the dummy approach, it is demonstrated that people generally neither move to or from this area. And here we can see that in the market access approach, it seems that people are actually moving away from this area that is affected by the changed first nature geography. So if we want to explain why it is that there's some population growth to this area, then there's essentially one channel left, and that's fertility. And here's the child to woman ratio, and estimated again in a different approach. And what we see is that there's a huge increase in fertility in this area, which corresponds to the increased population. Now, what about external validity? Well, for that we can use the event in the 1100s. So the Limfjord also had a western opening at the end of the Viking Ages. It turned out that it was pretty convenient to gather here in the northwestern Limfjord before you headed over to England and traded and did other stuff as well. Now, Viking Denmark and Viking Scandinavia is very different from its modern day equivalent. And it's also very different from its 19th century equivalent. It's different in terms of religion. It's different in terms of technology. It's different in terms of all the other different ways in which you could imagine things being important for economic development. So it's almost as if it's an entirely different test case, only that we keep the geography completely constant because it's the same place, except for the variation of the channel. So it's a very nice case for testing external validity. And between 1086 and 1208, the channel that existed here closed up. Now, of course, we don't have census data, but we do have modern register data in the form of the archaeological registers that you can just go and download and use. And what I have done with that is that I have estimated the probability of economic activity in one specific parish based on archaeological findings and the date that they have been dated to. So that's typically a range, and then I sample from that to create panel data. More details in the paper. Here's the estimated effect. What we see is that when the West Limfjord region became isolated, suddenly the Limfjord region also closed up economically. So geomorphology determined the location of prosperity in this case, and also in the 19th century case. And that's it. Thank you so much for spending some time with this presentation of this paper. I'm very excited to hear thoughts of any kind.